Habit number 1. Ask yourself the following 3 questions every single day. It will take you minutes to do so, but the impact is going to be quite profound. Okay, so the first question is, what is one thing I deeply appreciate about my life? The second question is, what is the most important thing I have to do today? And the third question is, what quality or qualities do I want to showcase to the world today? Now, I'm going to break down those 3 questions. I'm going to explain why they're so impactful. But before I do that, I want to contrast this kind of start to the day with a more reactive and unintentional start to the day. Right. So I've come to realize that a lot of the time, our thoughts, our behaviors, our actions are downstream from the content we consume. Okay, so let's imagine this. Maybe you don't have to imagine too hard. Let's imagine that you wake up in the morning, your smartphone is your alarm, and immediately you start going on the news. You see the negativity that's going on in your country or many countries around the world. You then go onto social media and see all kinds of negativity and conflict. And then you go onto your work email and realize there's a few things you didn't get done the day before. Let's just imagine that's your start. What does that do? Well, it starts off your day with negativity. I don't think it takes much to persuade you or convince you that if you start your day with that kind of negativity, is it any wonder that you're going to have a more negative outlook on the world? Does it really surprise you that that kind of start to the day might mean that you're more reactive with your partner, that you have a row with one of your work colleagues, that a very simple email that gets sent to you by your boss gets misinterpreted? I don't think it takes much to really draw that connection. Because if you start your day with negativity, because the human brain has a negativity bias, which has been very good for us for most of our evolution, the problem is it sets the tone for the rest of the day. Whereas if you start the day with positivity, now I'm not talking about toxic positivity here, about pretending that everything is okay in our lives with the wider world. It's not about that at all. But it's about giving yourself a sense of control each day. We know that people who have a strong sense of control, they do better in life. They're healthier, they're happier, they have better quality relationships. That sense of control is really important. So answering these 3 questions is going to give you that sense of control in a world that is fundamentally uncontrollable. Okay? So if you can start the day with that first question, what is one thing I deeply appreciate about my life? It's going to really help you. I know it sounds simple, but that's a question that ultimately has gratitude at its heart. And there is so much research showing the benefits of gratitude. There are studies showing that a daily practice of gratitude can help our moods, can help reduce symptoms of anxiety, depression, can help you be more productive. Answering this question each day will help you start to take action, no matter the current state of your life. No matter who we are, pretty much all of us can say we're grateful for at least one thing. And I know that some people around the world are living very, very difficult lives, but I honestly believe that most of us can be grateful for at least one thing. And if you start the day by writing that down and really thinking about it, I'm grateful that I have a job. I'm grateful that I can afford to put the heating on and buy food for my children. I'm grateful for my wife, whatever it might be. I promise this will start to change how you feel about yourself and the world. And in this video, I'm not going to go through all the research on gratitude. I've done that in some of my other videos here on this channel. But just know that a daily practice of gratitude is not only free, it has been shown to have so many positive impacts. In fact, some of the studies on gratitude say that if you just do it for 7 days, you can have positive impacts up to 3 months later. It really is quite remarkable. Okay, so there's 3 questions to start your day with. The first question is, what is one thing I deeply appreciate about my life? Second question, what is the most important thing I have to do today? I love this question. In many ways, I call this the anti-busyness question. Look, I know many of us feel overwhelmed. We feel busy. We've got too much going on. We know that chronic stress is on the rise. We know that rates of burnout are on the rise. There was a really alarming study here in the UK suggesting that 88% of UK workers have experienced a degree of burnout in the past 2 years. That is a quite worrying statistic about the state of our lives and the state of culture in this country and in many countries around the world. Now, answering this question is not suddenly going to change how much work you have to do, but it is going to change your relationship with your day. This question forces you to make a decision each morning. The power is in making the decision. What I don't want you to do is procrastinate and go, yeah, I've got a work deadline. I've got to take my kids to the after school club. I've got to do the shopping. I've got to cook a meal. Sure, all of these things are important. But the magic in this question is that you make a decision. Now, if you're skeptical, just hear me out, okay? If you're skeptical, I want you to try answering this question for the next 7 days. First thing in the morning, right? I don't want you to believe me. I want you to believe yourself. Answer that question and act on it for the next 7 days and just see if your life doesn't start to change for the better. I still haven't seen a single person where by answering that question, they've not started to feel better about themselves and the world, because you make a decision, you take action, and that daily action starts to build momentum, which is one of the most powerful forces for change. Now, I don't need to take too long over this question. Okay, I'll give you an example of how it looks for me. A few days ago, I had a really important work deadline. So in the morning, I said, the most important thing I do today is meet that work deadline. Yesterday, I wrote down, because it was a working from home day, I wrote down first thing in the morning, and I do this every morning. When my children come home from school today, I want to make sure I put my laptop down so that I can be fully present to talk to them and hear what they have to tell me. Okay? Today, in the morning, I said, actually, I've been busy for the last few days. I've not spent that much time with my wife. Tonight, once the kids have gone to sleep, let me make sure that my wife and I spend a bit of time together chatting and catching up. Now, these are small things, right? But by setting that intention first in the morning, I've actually gone and done those things each day. And here's the magic. If for 7 days, or let's say even 30 days, you write down the most important thing you have to do that day, and then you go ahead and do it, it is inconceivable that your life will not feel different. It is inconceivable that you won't feel better about yourself. I do it myself, and I've seen it with so many people. It's a simple question that has a really powerful cumulative effect. Now, why I think that question is so important in the modern world is because today, many of us feel like our to-do lists are never done. Right? You could complete your email inbox. You could get all your emails done and go to the kitchen, make yourself a cup of tea. And in that time where you've made the tea and drunk it, you could have received another 10 emails. There's nothing you can do about that. It's the nature of our modern communication. So you have to set the rules. You have to say what's most important to you, because if you think that you'll do the important things in life when everything else is done, you're going to be waiting a long time. Everything else is never done. There's always something else to do. So this is a very powerful question that encourages you each day to focus. And little by little, your life will start to change. Okay, so that's the second question. The third question is, which quality do I want to showcase to the world today? Now, the reason this question is so important is because many of us are living quite unintentional lives and think the way we are is who we are and the way we have to stay, but it isn't. Most of who we are, or much of who we are simply repeated behaviors. We think we're reactive. We think we're the type of person to get stressed. No. We don't have to be at all. If you take a moment each morning to visualize and actually write down, who is it that I want to be today? For me, when I'm answering that question, I often put things down like, I want to showcase the quality of patience to the world today, or compassion to the world today. And why it's so important is by taking a moment to write that down that morning and just think about how I might show that to the world, it means I'm much more likely to exhibit that quality to the world when I face problems or adversity. Right? If I've said in the morning, right, I want to be patient today. Well, if I'm tempted, right, to not be patient at the coffee shop or at work, or to react to an email, there's a little reminder on my head to know you were going to be patient today. And it sounds simple. It doesn't mean you'll be perfect every day. It really doesn't. Some days you won't. But by answering this question each day, you're constantly reminding yourself, who is the person I want to be? Who is the person that I know I can be? And this sounds really, really simple, and it is. But I can assure you, if you do it, you will start to change. The people around you will start to notice. Okay, so there's a lot more I could tell you about these questions. There's a whole video here on my channel, a 1-hour video where I go through these questions in a lot more detail. But for the purpose of this video, habit number 1 is to start each day with those 3 questions. It will take you less than 5 minutes. You can do it whilst having a cup of tea or coffee if you want, or on the way to work, whatever it might be. But don't just hear this information and think, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Nothing will change in your life if you don't take action. So answer those 3 questions. If you're thinking 3 questions is too much, okay, start with one of them. Which one of those questions spoke to you the most? Which one did you get a sense, wow, that could be quite an important question for me? Just start there. And if 30 days feels like too much, do it for 7 days and pay attention to how you feel when you are answering those questions compared to when you're not. Habit number 2, stop listening to experts. Now, I need to explain, right? I need to explain because I, as a medical doctor, would be considered an expert. And sure, I have a level of expertise from my training and my many years of clinical practice. That is true. But I still don't know what's best for you. Like I don't know your life. I believe that you actually know what's best for you better than me. And I think one of the biggest problems these days and why so many people are struggling is because we've outsourced our inner expertise to other people. We're now in a world where we're being bombarded by information. Health information, let's say, okay? On one level, this is a good thing. 20, 30 years ago, health information could only be gotten from, a few select books or from doctors or from universities. But the advent of the internet has changed everything. Now, anyone can have an opinion and can put out their expertise online. And don't get me wrong, I think that's a good thing. I really do think that is a very, very good thing. But there's also a potential downside. And the downside is that we are exposed to so many different opinions that many people just don't know who to believe anymore. I mean, is that something you have faced in your own life? Have you ever been confused by the opinions of experts? If so, let me know in the comments. I genuinely would love to know because this is something I'm so passionate about. Now, sometimes people will say, well, if you're going to get health advice, make sure it's from a qualified expert. Here's the problem with that piece of advice. You could listen to a podcast or a YouTube video or read a blog by 10 different medical experts, and they could give you 10 different opinions. So you're following the advice to listen to the expert, but the experts all have different opinions. I get this on my podcast. My podcast, Feel Better, Live More, has been running now for almost 7 years. Okay, we're just approaching conversation number 500, which is amazing. And one thing I've noticed, because I like to have a variety of different voices and views on my show, one thing I've noticed is that if I have a really well-credentialed expert talking about well-being, or let's say diet, one of them may have a certain view on what the best diet is, and another one might have a different view. And then what often happens whether it be in the YouTube comments or the Instagram DMs, people will say, Dr. Chatterjee, I'm confused. I don't know which expert I should trust. And I think that's the wrong question. I don't think the question should be, which expert should I trust? I think the question should be, why do I no longer trust myself? I want to explain what I mean by that. Right? I'm not saying ignore the opinions of experts. I'm really not. Listen to what people have to say, but then put it through your own filter. Only you know how that advice is landing for you, right? My latest book is called Make Change at Last. And in chapter 1, I talk about this idea of trusting yourself and how we need to get back in tune with our own bodies and what our bodies are trying to tell us. And in that chapter, there's a case study from a patient I once saw. Now, that patient, I think she was 54 years old, and she was an avid consumer of health information online. But she liked to listen to podcasts and read blogs, and she really wanted to engage and be proactive about her health. And she had read and heard an expert say that you should have 30 different plant foods a week. Right? So she was trying her best to do this by herself. And every time she was doing it, she'd get bloated, constipated, she'd have abdominal cramps. And she kept reading this advice from different experts, and she started to feel like a failure. Now, this is the big problem when we stop trusting ourselves and we put our faith in external experts, or we put too much faith in external experts, I should say, is that if something's not working, we think we're the failure. We think for some reason I can't follow the perfect advice that that expert has dispensed to me. And we start to have guilt and shame. I've seen this over and over again. This is why I'm so passionate about this idea. Now, I saw that lady. She told me what she had been doing. And I said to her, look, no piece of health advice, no matter how good, works for every single person. It may be that this is not the right approach for you, certainly at this stage in your life. And so I helped her experiment with different ways of eating. And over a few weeks, we discovered together that when she's on a more low-carb style of eating, and she only has 5 to 10 plant foods a week, she's thriving. When she was eating like that, she started to lose weight, like a bit of excess weight that she wanted to lose. She had more energy. Her sleep was better. She had more vitality. All her digestive symptoms had gone. And when I checked her blood tests, they were all looking absolutely perfect. Now, that doesn't mean the expert who dispensed that advice online was wrong. No, it doesn't. That advice is probably going to be super helpful for many people, but not for everyone. And that's the whole point about this habit that I want you to think about bringing into your life. I want you to start trusting yourself a little bit more. Okay, not everything has to come from external experts. I believe, and I've seen this with patients over the years, they know when they're on the right diet for them. How do they know? Because their body tells them. They feel it with the way they feel, their energy, their cognition, their focus, their relationships, how calm they are. They feel it. And so one practice that's going to help you start listening and trusting yourself is a daily practice of solitude. Now, don't think about that as a negative thing. This is time for yourself. If you are constantly consuming information from the outside each day, like I mentioned in habit 1, you're never going to start to hear what your own body is telling you. Right? So I would say for 5 or 10 minutes a day minimum, can you spend a bit of time with yourself? And this can literally be anything that you want. Not what I want you to do, what you want. This could be 10 minutes of yoga. It could be journaling. Maybe those 3 questions I've just mentioned, they could be part of your daily journaling practice. It could be meditation. It could be a 20-minute walk around your block without also looking at your phone. It could even be in the morning, you sit with a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, whatever you like, and mindfully drink that coffee without consuming information on your phone or online. Anything that allows your innermost thoughts to come up. Now, this may take a bit of time because if you've spent many, many years not listening to your body's signals and trying to get all your advice from outside, yeah, it may take a bit of time. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying this video and want to dive deeper into the topic of sleep, I have created a free special guide containing my top 5 science-backed tips to help you get your best night's sleep and reduce fatigue. If you want to get hold of this free guide, all you have to do is click on the link in the description box below. But I've got a friend, for example, who loves the sun salutation sequence in yoga. Okay, he's done yoga on and off for years, but over the past couple of years, he's really committed to a 10-minute morning practice. What he tells me, and I experienced that myself with my own personal morning practice, is that by keeping the 10-minute yoga practice the same each day, he starts to realize when he's starting to feel different. So on some days, his yoga practice feels really fluid. He feels flexible and free. Whereas on other days, the same moves start to feel tight and restricted, and he doesn't feel as though he's got any flexibility at all. And by doing that practice every day, it helps him get to know himself better. For example, if he's feeling tight and not very fluid, he knows it's a sign that there's too much stress building up in his life, that maybe he's working too hard. Maybe there's an important conversation in one of his relationships that he has to have. So your body is always giving you signals. The question is, have you taken time to listen? Now, there's much more I could say on this topic, and if you're interested, let me know below and I'll make a whole video on this because I think it's really, really important. And if you do, let me know specifically what you want to know. But generally, the idea here is that I think these days we're overly listening to experts. We're not listening to ourselves enough. And a very simple way to start to change that is to have a daily practice of solitude. We are quite literally killing ourselves with comfort. Many of the conditions and diseases I see, both physical health and mental health, are caused by an excess of comfort. So today, if you want to thrive, if you want to be resilient, you have to intentionally introduce discomfort into your life. So in this video, I want to share with you the uncomfortable truth about life and show you how you can live longer, healthier, and happier. Now, you've got to understand that we're wired for comfort as humans. Life used to be uncomfortable, so we tried to make things easier. But the problem is, I would say in the last 50 years, something has changed in society. Before that, our desire for comfort was helping us. Now we've got to a point where comfort is killing us. Just think about what you can do today that you couldn't do in the past. You could be sitting at home on your sofa watching television. And at the same time, you could go to an app on your phone and order some fast food delivery. You could do your shopping. We can even socialize with friends, all from the comfort of our chair. And for all of that, you don't actually have to leave your house. That's a life of comfort that actually ends up being a life of discomfort, but the wrong kind of discomfort. The discomfort that comes when you're ill, when you're in pain, when your health is deteriorating, when you can't do the things that you want to do. That's a different form of discomfort. Let's just think about what we had to do in the past to get by. In order to simply survive and be, you had to do things that today we would consider uncomfortable. You literally had to go out, acquire food, bring the food back, cook it, and then consume it. You couldn't be sedentary and sit on that sofa for the entire day. You just couldn't do it. You had to move your body. So today, you have to intentionally introduce discomfort into your life. The most helpful method I've found about introducing discomfort regularly is to create some rules around discomfort. Now, the incredible thing about rules is that they help to automate our behavior. So if you make a rule and say, I'm always going to do this in this situation, you don't have to think about it every time. So I'll give you an example from my own life. I introduced this rule, I would guess about 5 years ago. And the rule is this: always take the stairs. It was a really powerful rule because it means that my default becomes I take the stairs. In my local supermarket, if I drive there, which I often do, right? I have a rule that I always take the stairs. I don't take the elevator. I don't take the lift. It's a rule that I apply in my life. When I'm at an airport, I will never take the escalator. I will always take the stairs, even if I've got bags with me. When I check into a hotel, I'll always look for the stairs instead of taking the elevator. Now, I say always. Let me be clear what I mean by that. I don't always take the stairs 100% of the time, but by making that a rule, I would guess that 90 to 95% of the time I do. My default becomes taking the stairs. And I can bet you, if I didn't have a rule in place that I'd internalized, the percentages would be way different. If I had to ask myself every time there's stairs and a lift, which one am I going to take? What do I feel like taking today? And the stairs is not going to win it, right? Most of the time, the lift is going to win it. I'll just take the lift. I'll just take the lift today. But before you know it, you've taken the lift 10 or 20 times in a row, right? One thing I didn't mention at the start, but I think it's really important, is that, look, not everyone is physically able to go upstairs, right? If that's you, I get it. This may not be the most applicable rule for you. But if we just zoom out for a minute, instead of getting bogged down with the actual rule itself, just use the ideas, use the principles. Go, okay, what is the state of my life? How comfortable am I? And where can I introduce discomfort in a way that appeals to me and in a way that I think I can stick to? And that's the uncomfortable thing to do, right? Throughout our whole evolution, we wanted to make things easier. In fact, I had this wonderful conversation with this Swedish psychiatrist, Dr. Anders Hansen, on my podcast, and he shared with me that our brain wants us to be lazy, anxious, and fat, right? It wants us to be anxious so that we can look out for danger, because that was really, really important. It also wants us to be lazy and fat. When food was there, when food was around, we'd eat it. In fact, we as humans have mechanisms to put on fat. That was a very helpful mechanism in the past. There's lots of food around, there's lots of fruit in the summer. Let's gorge on it, let's eat it, let's store those excess calories as fat so that we've got reserves of energy for the winter. But unfortunately, these days, that winter never comes. It wants us to conserve energy wherever we can. I mean, let's think about this modern invention, exercise. Now, there's very good reasons why we've invented it. But just imagine going to one of your ancestors 50,000 years ago and make the case to them why you would just go for a run for 10 kilometers and then come home without anything in your hands. I mean, you wouldn't do it. You wouldn't expend energy in that kind of way. You would conserve energy. You would go out running when you had to go on a hunt, right? You had to go and get something. That's how we're wired. So what we really need to do is put things into our life that help us navigate and counterbalance that natural instinct. That's why it's so important that we have our own personal rules for discomfort, right? I've shared one of mine, always take the stairs. It's such a powerful rule. I've shared that in companies, in schools, in all kinds of places. And it's very, very powerful because it changes your default. Now, physical inactivity is one of the leading causes of death across the entire planet. And if you think about that through the lens of comfort, life is more comfortable these days for most of us. I appreciate not everyone in the world, but for many of us, life has never been this materially comfortable. And therefore, if you don't have a practice, a regular system for bringing in discomfort, you're really going to struggle. I mentioned these diseases of discomfort. Let's take one of them, type 2 diabetes. Right, type 2 diabetes is a condition where our blood sugar starts to rise over a period of years, and we can no longer keep it down in its normal range. And because the blood sugar is high, it goes around the body, it gets deposited in different places, in our eyes, in our nerves, in our kidneys. It causes damage and also causes early death. Now, you could not really get type 2 diabetes in a world of discomfort. If you had to move your body each day to get food and then bring the food back and cook it, it's very unlikely you would develop a condition like type 2 diabetes, especially if the food that was available was natural, unprocessed whole foods, which is, of course, what it used to be. But in this world today, where we have highly processed food available 24 hours a day in many different places, right? Remember, we're wired to want to consume. And that's why I think so many people are struggling, because what we have to do today is work against our brain's natural instincts. So always take the stairs. Yes, it helps you physically, right? It helps you get physically stronger. You're moving your body weight against gravity. You work your quads, your glutes, your heart muscle, right? You're getting stronger physically. But I think these discomfort rules also do something very powerful psychologically, because you're choosing to take the uncomfortable option when a comfortable one is there for you. And I think that's something really, really powerful. It's showing your body and your brain who's boss. No, you're in charge. You're not going to be a victim to your brain's natural desires. You're going to take charge and go, no, I'm not going to do that, because that will not lead to me being healthy and happy. That will cause me problems. Another statistic which I find really alarming is when we think about our children today. There's a major study done. I think they've looked at over 25 million children in different countries, and they basically looked at how quickly they can run a mile. Now, remarkably, today, on average, it takes children 90 seconds longer to run a mile than it did in the 1980s. That is a staggering statistic. 90 seconds is a long time. So in just 40 or 50 years, our physical strength and fitness has dramatically gone down because life is much more comfortable, right? So you've got to think about, where can you bring this in? So I mentioned one, always take this as. I think it's a powerful rule. It's changed my life. It's changed the lives of many of my patients. I know it can change your life if you introduce it. But there's other rules we can think about, right? Think about discomforts. You can think about the cold. Many of us live in temperature-controlled houses, temperature-controlled cars on the way to work, and we don't have to face the cold anymore. And of course, there's a big trend these days about exposing yourself to cold water. Now, I don't think everyone has to do that. I don't think you have to do all of these rules. What I'm trying to do is give you options, right? One option could be, at the end of your daily warm shower, you do 30 seconds of cold. Okay? This may appeal to you, it may not appeal to you. There are some benefits reported in the literature for sure. Some studies have shown that people who take a 30-second cold shower each day at the end of their hot shower report less sick days over a 3-month period than those who don't. That's quite interesting. Are there effects there on our immune system? But again, I think the powerful benefits really are psychological. They're you choosing intentionally to do something uncomfortable when you don't have to. And I think that's where the gold is. I really do. You show yourself who's boss. You show yourself that you're resilient. You show yourself that you don't have to be at the whim of your brain's internal desires. You can override them. I think this is one of the main reasons why things like Tough Mudders, ultra marathons, wild swimming, wild camping, why these things are becoming more and more popular. Because I think we as humans instinctively know that this comfort, these comfortable lives are not good for us. Right? I'm not saying get rid of your comfort. We all like a warm house, a comfortable sofa. No, I'm saying enjoy that, indulge in it, but also make sure there's a bit of discomfort in your life. Yes, there are physical benefits. There are massive psychological benefits as well. It's really interesting. There were some studies done in Harvard a few years ago, and a group of people were shown a load of faces, and they were asked to identify the threatening faces, and they could do it no problem. But as the researchers gradually reduced the amount of threatening faces the people were shown, something incredible happened. They started to identify non-threatening faces as threatening. Now just think about that for a minute. The researchers called this prevalence-induced concept change. It's really, really interesting idea that in essence, we will start to create problems when problems don't exist. And I think that is kind of what happens to a lot of us these days with these comfortable lives. I'm not saying that people don't have tough lives and struggles. I'm not saying that. But a lot of the struggles are in our head these days. They're what we see online, what we perceive about the way other people think about us, the comparison we have when we look at other people on social media. We create all this internal stress. And what I found, and what I've experienced myself, is when I'm regularly doing hard things, the other things in my life that seem to be quite big, they go away. They don't take as much mental space up as they did. You'll hear this a lot from people, like people who didn't run and then they start running. They say, I'm less anxious, but I'm not worrying about all the things in my life like I used to, because they're actually doing things that really are difficult. And you're taking up a lot of that mental bandwidth by doing that difficult thing. And I think this is something that a lot of people don't realize. I've certainly seen this in patients where if they're feeling low and sitting at home and not out there connecting with people and not out there moving their body and challenging themselves, their world starts to contract, right? They start to worry, overly worry. They start to ruminate. And yes, there are other factors that play a role for sure. But once you can encourage these patients to get out there, start challenging themselves, joining a club when they might initially feel a bit nervous, they overcome that. They feel good about themselves. Right? They feel more resilient. And then they get all the benefits of doing that thing with other people. Their mental health starts to improve. So I think this desire for comfort, while I understand it and while I accept it's who we are as humans, I think we all need to take a long, hard look at ourselves and go, how much discomfort is there in my life? How much intentional discomfort, and can I change it? So what are some of these other discomfort rules can we think about applying into our lives? Well, honestly, there are infinite things we can think about introducing, right? So it's about you figuring out what's going to work for you. All I'm trying to do is share some examples that might inspire you to either take them on or tweak them to make them more suitable for you. But here in the UK, for example, there's something called Parkrun. Parkrun is a community event. Most towns and villages in the UK now, and many places around the world, also have Parkrun, where it's a Saturday morning event where people come together and they do 5 kilometers. I said do, I didn't say run, right? You complete 5 kilometers, either walking or running or a combination of both. And you can get timed, and Parkrun have a motto saying that no one ever comes last. They have a tail walker who's there at the back. So even the slowest person didn't come last. It's a wonderful, wonderful event. I started doing it with my kids a few years ago, and it has literally been life-changing. So how does that apply to discomfort rules? Well, it's very simple. If you live somewhere where there is a parkrun every Saturday, you can make it a rule that you never miss it. Rain or shine, hot or cold, you're going to turn up there. Because here's the reality. Once you get there, because of the community energy, you will complete those 5 kilometers. You just will. It's the way it works, the support, the volunteers. You just need to get yourself to the start line. Again, why is that a discomfort rule? Well, because the comfortable thing to do is to stay at home. Right? The comfortable thing to do is to stay in bed or make another coffee or have a nice, long, lazy brunch. And again, now and again, of course, there's nothing wrong with doing those things. But for me and my kids, we have a rule that we go to parkrun. If we're here and we're not away, we go to parkrun on a Saturday morning. And it's powerful because it removes decision making. I've realized this being a dad myself, right? If I leave it up to my kids to decide on a Saturday morning, do I feel like going? Well, you know what? A lot of the time we don't feel like going. It's cold, it's raining, it's a bit grey. But what I want to teach my kids is that you don't be a victim to your brain's desires. Because if we are, we're going to get sick. You have to tell your brain who's in charge. Right? So for some people, this is a very, very effective rule that helps them complete a 5K every Saturday. These discomfort rules are not only about the things that society conventionally think of as being hard, like taking the stairs, doing a park run, having a cold shower. There's other things that count as discomfort rules as well. What do many of us do in the evening? Hey guys, I really hope you're finding this useful. If you are and you want more content like it, please do check out my book, Make Change That Lasts, 9 Simple Ways to Break Free from the Habits That Are Holding You Back. It's in all the usual places as a paperback, ebook, and as an audiobook, which I'm narrating. Now, back to the video. We might be watching Netflix and relaxing. And again, nothing wrong with these things. But think about this. At 10 p.m., you're on your sofa, you're yawning, you're tired, you know you have to be up tomorrow, but you keep watching. Why? A, the content's probably really good and stimulating you. But B, it's comfortable. The easiest thing in the world is just to stay there. The harder thing is to put the phone off, get up off the sofa, and get yourself to your bedroom. It's easier to stay where you are. Right? So you could have a discomfort rule around that. An example might be in the week, you might want to have a rule that I'm never going to start a new episode after 9 p.m. Right? It's just a one-time rule, which means up until then, you're enjoying your box set, your series, whatever it might be, but it's 10 past 9. I'm really tempted. I'm not going to watch this. That's the uncomfortable thing to do. And what are the benefits? The benefits are that you're going to get to bed on time. You're going to sleep more, which is going to make you more resilient. You're going to crave less sugar and caffeine the following day. You'll have more energy, more focus. Your short-term health will be better. Your long-term health will be better. But it all started with a very simple discomfort rule. Now look, you don't have to follow this advice. These are only suggestions. You may go 9 p.m. is too early. Fine, make it 10 p.m. The point I'm really trying to get across is the modern world has convinced us that comfort is our natural state of being, but it's not. You know, last year, I was on the train down to London from the northwest of England where I live. And the person I was with was trying to use the app in the train to order a bottle of water from the cafe in a different carriage. You know what? The app wasn't working. And my friend got so annoyed it wasn't working. I thought about how mad this is as a situation. We're literally on a high-speed train, hurtling to one of the great capital cities of the world. And because that person has to get up, walk for 2 minutes to a cafe to buy a bottle of water, they were getting annoyed. Right? We become so reliant on comfort, we start to get agitated when that comfort's not there. The only way around that is to regularly practice discomfort. What you practice, you get good at. If you're practicing being comfortable all the time, you get really good at being comfortable and you get used to and accustomed to being comfortable. That's why I want you to think about where you can bring in discomfort into your life. Another discomfort rule you could think about applying in your life is to wake up and do one 5-minute action for your health. And why is that a discomfort rule? Well, it's a discomfort rule because you probably don't want to do it. You'd probably rather do something else. It's much easier to sit in bed, pick up your phone and scroll social media for 20 minutes and then read the news, okay? But what is that going to do for you? How's that going to help you get primed for the day? What if you made a commitment to yourself that every morning when I wake up, I'm going to do one 5-minute action for my health? It could be whatever you want. A workout, journaling, meditation, breath work, skipping, like anything you like. But again, it shows your brain who's in charge. It shows your brain that you don't have to be a victim to your brain's ancient desires. You can override them. And there's incredible power in doing that. It teaches you that you have autonomy. You are resilient. You can trust yourself. I have a morning routine that I do each morning. I've shared that on multiple occasions on this YouTube channel. But I think the power in doing something each morning is that it's uncomfortable. You get the uncomfortable win first thing in the morning, and that's what makes it so powerful. Another discomfort rule I've often used myself and with patients is to do with food. Many people these days are trying to change their diet, okay? They're trying to eat more healthily, snack less on the unhealthy foods. But it can be a challenge. Again, like I've already mentioned, the brain is wired to eat food when it's around, especially sweet, delicious, high-calorie foods. So a rule you could put into your life to try and counteract that is this one. I'm never going to eat after 7 p.m. It's a simple rule that can be effective for some people because what kind of food decisions do we tend to make after 7 p.m. or late into the evening? For many of us, they tend to be the decisions that we wish we hadn't made, right? Maybe we start off the day really well with a healthy breakfast and we're good in the day, but sometimes we've had a stressful day, we're feeling tired, our ability to resist temptation is down at the end of the day, and people often go to sugar, to biscuits, to ice cream, okay? Now, I get that. I don't want you to beat yourself up if that's you. All I'm saying is that you could apply a one-time rule. I'm not going to eat after 7 p.m. or 8 p.m. or whatever it is that's going to work for you to try and reduce that. It's a rule for discomfort that's going to make you healthier. Of course, that doesn't mean on occasion you might be out with your friends and have a dessert late. When I say a rule, like I said about the stairs, I don't take the stairs 100% of the time, but it's about 90 to 95% of the time. All of the rules I've suggested, I don't want you to necessarily take them verbatim and actually use them unless you want to. Just use the ideas, use the principles, go, okay, where can I introduce discomfort in a way that appeals to me and in a way that I think I can stick to? So have a think about what I've said, right? Have a think about what I said about all these diseases of comfort. It's a different way to look at ill health, isn't it? But I think it's a very helpful way. And I've made some suggestions, right? You don't have to do them all. Pick one or pick two. Pick the ones that appeal to you or tweak them to make them more suitable to you in your life. Let me know in the comments which ones you're planning on doing and what you think of them. I genuinely would love to know. And whatever you plan on introducing into your life, always remember, pay attention. How is it making you feel? What improvements are you noticing? Because when you start to really get in tune with that, it gives you the motivation to keep going. When you're not sleeping well, every aspect of your life gets worse. Moods, relationships, focus, concentration, how much we eat. And in the long term, sleep deprivation increases your risk of early death and increases the chance of pretty much every chronic disease that we've studied so far. I've been a doctor for over 2 decades now. I've seen tens of thousands of patients. But what I have seen time and time again is that people are engaging with behaviors that they don't realize are sabotaging the quality of their sleep. When I can help them improve their sleep quality, immediately they feel a change in their energy and their vitality. And so in this video, I want to share with you some of the common things I have seen my patients do in the evening that without them realizing has negatively impacted the quality of their sleep. The first thing I want to talk about is what I call liquid stress. So what's liquid stress? Well, in that category, I put caffeine-containing drinks and alcohol. Now, I understand that many people consume these beverages, they enjoy these beverages, but I think it's really important to understand the potential impact that they might be having on your sleep. So let's start with caffeine. Now, we all metabolize caffeine slightly differently, which basically means we've all got a different tolerance to how much caffeine we can manage. However, in my experience, many people are consuming far too much for their own needs, and it's having a negative impact on their sleep. And here's the problem. If you drink too much caffeine at the wrong times, it negatively impacts your sleep, which means the following day, you wake up feeling tired and you need more and more caffeine to get you through. And so it becomes a really vicious cycle that can be really hard for people to break out of, especially if they have to function during the day. Now, when we think about compounds in the body and how quickly they are broken down and then eliminated, we often talk about something called the compound's half-life. Well, the half-life of caffeine is roughly 6 hours. Now, I do appreciate we're all slightly different, and that exact amount will depend on your genetics. But let's just imagine that for all of us, it is 6 hours. Well, what that means is if at noon, so midday, you leave your office and you order a large coffee at your local coffee shop, it means that at 6 p.m., 6 hours later, half of the caffeine in that drink is still going around your body and your brain. And it means at midnight, a quarter of the caffeine that you consumed at 12 o'clock is going around your body and your brain. Now, for many of us who know that we're sensitive to caffeine, we wouldn't dream of having a quarter cup of coffee in the evening before we go to bed, or a half cup of coffee at 6 p.m. So with that knowledge, you're now empowered to think, wow, could that be an issue for me? You see, many people will say, well, look, I've been fine. I've been having a 3:30 p.m. cup of tea or cup of coffee my entire working life. Why would it suddenly be affecting me now? And this is something I've seen many, many times. People were able to tolerate a certain dose of caffeine for a period of time, but then at some point, they no longer can. And I think there's a number of potential reasons for this. You may have heard me talk about stress in the past, and I talk about stress thresholds, this idea that we can accumulate a certain amount of stress, but when we get to that threshold, that's when things start to go wrong. And I often think about caffeine in relation to thresholds as well. I have seen before that when patients are, let's say, under low levels of stress, life is pretty calm, there's not much going on in their personal life, things are generally feeling calm and in control, they can often tolerate a bit of caffeine, maybe late afternoon at 4 p.m., let's say. But when the stress load in their life starts to increase and go up, it's almost as if they don't have the capacity anymore to deal with that caffeine. I've seen this enough times to know that this is a real thing. So the reason I'm bringing this up is if you're someone who's struggling with your sleep and you have told yourself a story that caffeine is not at play here, because in the past, you were absolutely fine with caffeine in the afternoon, I just want to sort of invite you to consider that perhaps things have changed. And the only way you would really know is by cutting it out. Right, so if that is you, what I'd recommend is that for at least 7 days, you consume any caffeine you're going to have in the morning, so before noon, and just pay attention to what happens. And then if you're not sure, what you could do is go cold turkey and cut it all out for a week or two and see what happens. Now, if you are going to go cold turkey, you may well get withdrawal symptoms. People can feel moody, really tired, headaches. Their emotions can be quite turbulent. It can cause relationship issues. So you've got to be careful before you adopt an approach like this. So for most people, and in the past when I reduced my own caffeine consumption, I have done it very, very gradually, because if I was to stop abruptly, you can get a lot of symptoms. So the point I'm trying to make is that caffeine is a psychoactive stimulant. It's the most consumed psychoactive stimulant on the planet. And if you look around, any urban environment now, any airport, any shopping mall, any town centre, any village, what do you see? A surplus of coffee shops. But don't get me wrong, I love sitting in a coffee shop with a nice long black, doing a bit of work. I enjoy the vibe, the atmosphere. But I think if we take a step back, we have to ask ourselves, what has gone on in society whereby we have this many coffee shops? You know, what's going on? You know, what's your relationship like with caffeine? Can you function without it? Do you agree that much of society is overly reliant on caffeine? What's really interesting is that many people who consume caffeine regularly will tell you that they need caffeine to function well. It helps them think better. It helps them be more cognitively sharp. And yes, there is some data supporting this, but, and it's a very big but, there was a University of Bristol study from 2010 which really seemed to conclude that caffeine only helps our cognitive performance if we are a habituated caffeine drinker. Basically, if you're used to having caffeine regularly, then the reason you feel a boost in the morning is because you're suffering from withdrawal symptoms, and all that caffeine is doing is getting you back to the sort of level where non-caffeinated drinkers exist all the time. Now, I don't think it's cut and dried. I think there is some evidence to support that a bit of caffeine can improve our cognitive performance in certain situations and athletic performance, having said that. But what I want to do is help empower people, right? I want to help you understand the impact that caffeine might be having on the quality of your sleep. Now, if you cut it out for a week or reduce it to just being in the morning for a week, and you find that you're sleeping better and that your energy goes up and you have more vitality and more focus and your relationships are better, then you're empowered with that information. You can then choose what you want to do. You may go, wow, I quite like feeling like this. Or you might go, actually, although I'm feeling better, I really miss those extra cups of coffee that I was having. And on balance, for me, I'd rather have them. Only you can make that decision. I just want to help you understand the impact that it might be having on you. And as I say, in my experience, I've seen so many patients who told me that caffeine wasn't having an impact on their sleep health, but when they cut back on it, reduce it to just being in the morning, or quit altogether, they soon realized just what it was doing. Now, the scientific research on caffeine and its impact on our sleep is pretty clear. It shows us that caffeine can prolong sleep latency, which is the time it takes to fall asleep. It can reduce total sleep time. It can reduce sleep efficiency and worsen perceived sleep quality. But again, it's important for me to remind you that this is a dose-dependent effect. Many people are absolutely fine with a small dose of caffeine at some point in the morning. So I'm not trying to say you should give it up. I'm asking you to pay attention as to what impact it might be having on your sleep. Now, what about those people who say, I'm absolutely fine. I can knock back a double espresso after dinner at 9:30 p.m. and I fall asleep completely fine? Well, look, it's impossible for me to comment on every single situation, but the scientific research that I've read that does look at this is seeming to suggest that even if you can fall asleep after drinking, let's say, a double espresso in the evening, that the quality of your sleep may not be as good had you not done that. And again, I think some of the best ways to assess this for ourselves is to ask ourselves, when we wake up in the morning, how do we feel? What is our energy like? What are our relationships like? Is anyone around me flagging that I'm being a bit moody? Of course, all these things can have other reasons behind them. But if we're trying to assess our sleep, generally speaking, it's not really the number of hours that we need to be overly worried about. Yes, on balance, most people seem to need between 7 and 9 hours. But some people seem to do okay on 6.5 hours, right? Some people need a bit more. And again, you can ask yourself these questions in the morning. Have I woken up feeling refreshed? Can I wake up at roughly the same time without needing an alarm? All of these things help to give you an idea of the quality of your sleep. So when we're thinking about caffeine, it's not just coffee and black tea you need to be thinking about. Green tea does contain caffeine. Even decaffeinated coffee has small amounts of caffeine within it. Dark chocolate can have caffeine within it. I know for me personally, I'm quite sensitive to caffeine. I will consume caffeine, but only in the morning. If I have dark chocolate in the afternoon, I can often feel it in bed at night. So just be aware that caffeine is hiding in all different kinds of places. And if you are trying to improve your sleep, then trying to be more mindful of your intake is usually a really good idea. Now, the other form of liquid stress I often think about when it comes to sleep is alcohol. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying this video and want to dive deeper into the topic of nutrition, I have created a free special guide which contains the 5 most important changes I think we all need to make when it comes to our diet. If you want to get hold of this free guide, all you have to do is click on the link in the description box below. Many people use alcohol as a way of winding down in the evening, and many people will tell you that it helps them fall asleep. Now, whilst it's impossible to say what's going on in every individual situation, as a general rule, we have to stop thinking of alcohol as a sleep aid. Alcohol is really a sedative, and sedation is not the same thing as sleep. It's easy to mistake it for sleep, but if you were to observe both states in a sleep lab, you would see a completely different picture with your brainwaves. Sedation is where your brain cells have switched off. Sleep is where hundreds of thousands of brain cells coordinate in their firing. It's a very different process. So in my experience as a doctor, many people who are struggling with their sleep are doing so because of their alcohol consumption. Now, can we say that any amount of alcohol is going to affect someone's sleep? I don't think we can say that. A little bit like caffeine, there are genetic tendencies at play here. I also think, just like caffeine, that the amount of stress in your life also impacts how quickly and easily you can metabolize alcohol. And back in the days when I did used to drink alcohol, I would often find that a glass of red wine in the middle of a work week, when there was a lot of stress going on and I was quite tired, would have quite a negative impact. But that same glass of red wine, if I was on holiday somewhere, switched off from work with my family, would have very little impact. So I think it's impossible to look at these things in isolation. The rest of your life, the context, seems to matter quite a lot. But if we look directly at what the scientific research shows us about what alcohol does for our sleep, most of the research points to alcohol affecting our sleep in the following ways. Firstly, it fragments your sleep. So basically, when you've consumed it, you may well feel as though you've slept fine, but you wake up feeling exhausted. And often this is because you woke up on multiple occasions through the night. It was a much lighter sleep than usual. And because you're often not aware of those increased awakenings, you often don't draw the association and you think it had nothing to do with that alcohol. But it was the alcohol causing the sleep fragmentation, which is why you feel so tired the following day. Alcohol also has a negative impact on a type of sleep that we call REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, also known as deep sleep. And that's a particularly important part of your sleep cycle. Many sleep researchers call it emotional first aid, because it's the part of the sleep cycle where we actually process difficult experiences that happen during the day. So that's really, really important. And if we look around at society and see how many people these days are struggling with their mood, with depression, with feeling anxious, well, it stands to reason that alcohol consumption, reducing REM sleep, which, as I've just mentioned, is emotional first aid, could that be contributing? Absolutely. On a wider note, we know that when people are sleep deprived, their outlook on the world is more negative. The tired brain remembers more negative experiences than the well-rested brain. So improving your sleep quality is one of the quickest ways that you can actually change your experience of the world. Now, look, many people will say to me, yeah, Doc, I understand this, but I really enjoy a glass of wine in the evening just before I go to bed. It relaxes me. It's a time for myself. It's a little reward. Now, I understand all of those things. I understand there can be some powerful associations with certain things like alcohol. And again, I'm not trying to say that you need to give up. What I'm trying to say is that I know that for many people, consuming alcohol in the evening is negatively impacting their sleep. And that poor sleep is negatively impacting the quality of their life. So I'm just trying to help you understand that you might want to re-examine your relationship with alcohol. And if you do insist on consuming it in the evening, if you say, no, that's a part of my life, then I would urge you to consider, could you bring it forward in the evening? For example, if you were to have a glass of red wine at 5 p.m. as opposed to 10 p.m., the truth is that the 5 p.m. glass of red wine is going to have less of an impact on your sleep than the 10 p.m. one, because by the time you go to bed, some of it will have been processed and metabolized. Having said that, we've got to be careful. If we start drinking at 5 p.m., it could lead to even more drinks. It could lead to increased snacking, etc., etc. There are always knock-on effects. But the real take-home point is that if you are going to have it in the evening, the earlier, the better when it comes to your sleep. So there's many reasons to have a little think about how much alcohol you're consuming and when. And just zooming out here on this whole topic of liquid stress, I get it. Many people enjoy caffeine-containing drinks. Many people enjoy alcohol-containing drinks. I really don't want to be here telling you what to do with your life. You're absolutely able to choose what is right for you. But what I have seen time and time again is that people just don't realize the impact that these drinks are having on their sleep. And my hope is, by helping you understand that, you may be able to reset your relationship and consume them, if you choose to, in a way that's helping you and not harming you. Loneliness is a topic you are incredibly passionate about. I've heard you say before that the impact of loneliness is greater than the impact of obesity. So I wonder if right at the top of this conversation, you could spell out just how damaging is loneliness and why does it affect our physical health so much?
Well, this is not something I learned about in medical school for sure. And it's surprising to many, but the health impact of loneliness and isolation is really profound. And it teaches us that loneliness is so much more than a bad feeling. But when people are struggling with being disconnected from each other, it actually is associated with an increased risk in depression, anxiety, and suicide. So real impacts on mental health. The impact on our physical health is also profound, even though perhaps even more surprising, which is that there's an increase in risk for stroke and heart disease and dementia, as well as premature death. And with premature death, like this increase in mortality that we see associated with being lonely and isolated is on par with the impact of smoking. And it's even greater than what we see with obesity. And I mention that because we are trained to understand that smoking and obesity, these are classic public health issues. But it turns out that addressing loneliness and isolation is just as important because the impact on our well-being is just as profound.
For someone who's listening, Vivek, who has never heard about the impacts of loneliness before, I think they may intuitively understand, sure, it can affect your mental well-being. Who wants to feel isolated? Who wants to feel as though they don't have someone around them to open up to share things in their life with? But I don't think people know or intuitively understand, I should say, the impact on our physical health.
Yeah.
When you say that loneliness is as harmful as smoking, I think for some people they'll go, well, how does that work? You know, what's going on there? Surely smoking 15 cigarettes a day is more harmful than being lonely. But of course, the data says that that's not the case.
Yeah, and it's a legitimate question. And in fact, I too wondered the same thing. How is it that loneliness actually impacts your health in this way, your physical health in particular? And so I had to study this more deeply, understand it, you know, as I delved into this subject. There's a lot more to understand here, by the way, and that's one of the reasons more research is needed. We see the effects very clearly, how those effects come about, like what biological processes are taking place in the body, is where the understanding has to strengthen. But there's some theories as to how this happens. One is, and the one I'll mention is particularly focused around inflammation in our body. It turns out that when we are lonely and isolated from one another, that actually puts our bodies in a stress state. Now, a stress state in the short term can be good, right? If you get stressed before an exam, or before you make a big presentation at work. Sometimes that can rev you up and focus you, and you can perform better. But when stress is chronic, when it's prolonged in our lives, that's when it can start to do damage, right? And that's when we see that stress can actually lead to ill effects on our mental and physical health. And particularly with stress, what we see is that it can be associated with increased levels of inflammation in our body, which can over time damage tissues and blood vessels, increase our risk of cardiovascular disease and other illnesses. So stress and inflammation may be an explanation in part for why loneliness, especially chronic loneliness, lead to the health impacts. And lastly, just consider this also as a parallel. Like, we're all familiar with the concept of like lifting a heavy object, whether it's at the gym or in your house when you're moving things. And if you go to the gym and you lift, a weight and you curl it a few times and you put it down, over time you can get stronger and stronger. But what if you pick up a really heavy weight, you curl and contract your muscle, and then you hold it like that for 3 hours? Like, imagine the damage that would do, like, to your muscle. That's the equivalent of what happens with short-term stress versus long-term stress. Short-term stress potentially can help you get stronger. But when the stress is chronic, when it's prolonged, it can start to damage you. And that's essentially what chronic loneliness does.
When I explain the impacts of loneliness to my patients, I always do it through the lens of the stress response, because it kind of makes so much sense that, a million years ago, or 200,000 years ago in our hunter-gatherer tribes, if we were by ourselves and we didn't have our tribe around us, well, our very clever body would be preparing us. They know that we're vulnerable. If we were to get attacked,
That's right.
The body prepares us for that. So increases inflammation, increases how quickly our blood will clot. Because, of course, if we get attacked by a wild predator, instead of bleeding to death, the blood's going to clot and it's going to save our life. And I really like that way of thinking about it, because I've certainly found that patients get it when you explain it like that. They go, yeah, of course, it kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I've heard you say before that loneliness has always existed in humanity, but today it has a different flavor.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I think the human experience is to be lonely from time to time, just like the human experience is to be hungry or thirsty from time to time. Loneliness ultimately is a signal our body's sending us when we lack something we need for survival. And if we respond to that by filling that need with food or drink, in the case of hunger or thirst, or in this case with human connection, in the case of loneliness, then it goes away. So it's been part of the human experience. We recognize it. The problem and the interesting flavor of loneliness today is sort of the following. Like, number one, we're finding that young people are actually struggling with greater levels of loneliness than older people, right? And this is a bit counterintuitive, because people typically think, well, when you're younger, you're at school, you're around other kids. When you're at university, you're surrounded by other students as well. You've got a family around you. Like, why would you be lonely, right? But in the US, for example, we are finding that the rates of loneliness among young people are double that among those who are 65 and older. And this type of data showing a skew toward those who are younger is popping up in other countries as well. The other thing that's different about the flavor of loneliness today compared to, let's say, 40, 50 years ago, is that fundamental changes and shifts in technology have just fundamentally altered how we interact with one another, such that we can be around lots of other people, but be completely disconnected from them. I think about, for example, the recent university tour that we did in the United States, and where we spent a lot of time talking to students about their experiences of loneliness. And I will say, just parenthetically, that these events, by the way, of all the events I've done, as a public official over a number of years, were the ones that seem to generate the most engagement and demand, because young people are feeling and experiencing loneliness so intensely. But what they often talked about was the fact that they had lots of people around them on college campuses, on university campuses, but they said the culture has changed such that it's not easy to just go up and talk to someone anymore. People have their earbuds in, they're looking at their phones, they're on their laptops in the dining hall. And they say it's just, the culture just isn't anymore, or it isn't easy to make it easy to actually go up and talk to one another. That is fundamentally different from how we have existed for most of humanity. Like, we didn't exist for years in a situation where we were all together yet weren't talking to one another or engaged with one another. So this has led to a circumstance where millions of people around the world are surrounded by others, yet feeling disconnected from them, feeling like people don't know them, feeling like they're alone. And that means that we've got to do something different, than just trying to throw people together in a room and hope that they feel better. Because as this has gone on over time, young people in particular are telling us that not only are they on technology and with people online more than they are in person, but they're also saying that their comfort with in-person interaction has diminished. Mm-hmm. And the pandemic played a role in this as well for young people who went through the isolation in particular of 2020 at a very sensitive time in their development, in their social and psychological development. And many of them tell us today that they feel that the pandemic made them age backward, that it made it harder for them to actually interact with others socially, and they're still trying to catch up to that. So that's all the flavor of loneliness that I look at and see today, and I particularly worry about it when it comes to young people.
There was a book, I think it was published in around 2015, 2016, called Reclaiming Conversation by Sherry Turkle from MIT. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it.
Yes, I am.
I found that book such a fascinating read. And I remember clearly that she made the case in that book that youngsters, for want of a better term, the children, the teenagers growing up today, many of them, as you just mentioned, prefer to communicate electronically for a number of reasons. But one of the points she made was that from the interviews she conducted, people were saying, yeah, I prefer it because it's more predictable. I can take my time, I can edit, I can make sure that I have crafted the perfect text message to send. Whereas, of course, in real life interaction, like we're doing now, we have to respond in real time. We may get something wrong. We may jumble our words or whatever. We can't edit before we speak. And it really made an impact on me, that, because I thought, wow, we're fundamentally changing how people are communicating. We are editing first before we connect, instead of connecting first. I'm not saying edit second. I don't think we should be editing. We should be having those real life interactions. But it is becoming more of a problem, isn't it?
It is. And will you just share that example? It's really timely and in my head poignant, because there are two primary challenges that are introduced by that situation. One is an authenticity gap and the other is a skill gap. So one of the things that's powerful about being in person is it's easier to sort of, for people to understand who you are and where you're coming from, because they're hearing what you're saying unedited. They're also looking at your facial expressions, your body language, your tone. Like, all of these things contribute to how we connect with and understand each other. Yeah. When I just see the text that you've sent, I know that that's curated, edited, sanitized, whatever it might be. My question is, what's he really thinking? Who am I really talking to? Do I really get where he's coming from, get who he is? And all that is harder online. So it's easier to be authentic in some ways, have an authentic connection when you're in person, which is why I always say that 5 minutes of in-person time with someone is so much better sometimes than half an hour of texting back and forth with somebody, because you can just understand somebody more deeply. But the other part, in addition to authenticity, is the skills part. So the truth is, like in real life, we need to know how to interact with other people, whether that's doing a job interview in person, whether that's interacting with a customer, with a neighbor, whether that's asking somebody out on a date, if you're younger, or figuring out how to negotiate conflict in a relationship. These are all things we have to do in person. And the question is, where do we build the skills to do that? And if you're growing up in an environment where you don't have those opportunities because most of the interaction is online, then what happens is you start to go down a downward spiral where you become less and less comfortable with in-person interaction, so you avoid it. Yeah. And then you tilt more toward online interactions, which makes you even less comfortable with in-person, and down the spiral goes. And then what you do is then you send kids off to university where they have to interact with people in person, and it's a very difficult experience for them. And I don't blame students in university, because if you've grown up for the last number of years without that skill set, because most of your interactions have been online, then it's going to be harder for you. So somewhere we need to help young people build those skills, build that muscle for in-person interaction. It's ultimately more fulfilling, but that doesn't mean it's always easy.
No.
Just in the same way that the first time you go to the gym, if you've never worked out, like it's uncomfortable initially to lift weights, to be on a treadmill, to run. You're going to feel tired. It might be a little bit painful, but then you build strength and ultimately you're in a much better place.
Yeah, it's fascinating. As you were talking then, I was taken back to my childhood, and a couple of things came up for me. One is, when we were kids, mobile phones did not exist. So most families, most households would have a landline phone, certainly in the UK.
Yeah.
And I remember as a teenager, if I wanted to get hold of one of my friends from school to arrange something, I had to phone the landline, talk to my friend's parents, and ask, interact with an adult basically before you could get hold of your friends.
Yes.
And we took that sort of stuff for granted. But the generation today, because of mobile phones, they're bypassing having to talk to an adult.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying, there aren't benefits to that, but you do miss out on developing that skill of talking to this adult who you may not know very well. You have to, exchange pleasantries with them. They may ask you questions, which, you then have to answer. So that's the first thing, which I thought was interesting. The second thing, it's funny, recently, I had a meeting with my team, an in-person meeting to do with this podcast. And I was reflecting with my wife afterwards and saying, you know what? I just assume everyone finds it easy to be in groups and interact, but I shouldn't make that assumption because not everyone does. And some people get intimidated in large groups and they don't know what to say. And I feel I've always found it really easy. I don't know if that is an innate skill. I don't think it is. I think it was something that my mother drilled into me. So I can remember at the age of 12, Vivek, on our street, 5 doors down, a new family arrived. I remember my mum said to me, okay, this afternoon, I want you to go knock on the door, introduce yourself, because they've got a boy who looks like he's your age. I'm like, what? Just go round? Mum's like, yeah, I want you to go and knock on the door, introduce yourself to his parents, and say, if he doesn't have any friends, he wants him to play with, that you're just down the road. I didn't like it. I can't say I was excited about doing that, but that's the kind of stuff my mum would kind of make me do. And it's funny, I think that's totally relevant to what you're talking about, because as a kid, society through landlines and other things made me interact with other people, like all kids had to. But also, I think on a family level, my parents, my mother in particular, would probably recognize that this is an important skill and make me go into my zone of discomfort, practice, as you say, it's a skill, and get better at it. So now as an adult, I find it really, really easy.
I love that your mother did that. I mean, that it's a powerful thing. And what I love that your mother did not do is she didn't say, well, because this is a little challenging or uncomfortable for Rangan, he doesn't need to do it. But she said, I'll support you through it, but it's important to do.
Yeah.
And then you built a skill as a result. And I think in the same way that parents might encourage their child to take music lessons, and to learn to play the piano or the violin, or might encourage them to join a basketball team, even though they're not great initially and then they build skill. I think we have to actually look at social interaction in the same way. And perhaps 40, 50 years ago, we didn't have to do that. But we're living in a different time right now where the default is not anymore that young people just develop and build all of these in-person social skills, because the environment has changed, the technology environment in particular. Like when I was growing up, I remember that my parents, I was really shy and introverted as a kid. And so it was actually hard for me to go and just make friends and stuff. But I remember my parents would recognize that. And they did something very similar to what your mom did, is they knew which neighbors had kids. right? And so they made me go to the neighbor's house, knock on the door, and ask the parents if the kid was free to play, right? And I hated doing this initially. I was like, oh God, I don't want to do that. Because, and the big worry, the reason I didn't want to do it is I was scared what would happen if they said no.
Yeah, of course.
Like, I don't want to feel rejected like that as a kid. And I still remember the neighbor across from us ultimately said no. He's like, no, I'm too busy. I got homework, right? And I felt like crushed, right? And I was like, oh, this is like, oh, why did I do this? I felt so embarrassed.
I knew I shouldn't have gone.
Yeah, I knew I shouldn't have gone. But then but they would keep doing things like that. Like when we had a tragedy in our school where a couple of kids were driving to get lunch and got into a car accident, and tragically one of them died. And the kid who made it, who thankfully was survived, was somebody that we had known. I wouldn't say he was the closest of friends, but he was a friend. Mm-hmm. And I remember my parents said to me, call him, go over and visit him and make sure he's okay. And I was like, I don't know if he wants me to come over. What am I supposed to do? I don't know. I was in school, in grade school at the time. But they literally drove me to his house, dropped me off there. I knocked on the door. And I still remember to this day, we ended up spending 2 hours together, just walking. We didn't talk anything about what happened, about the just tragic car accident. How are you doing? We just talked about other stuff, what was going on in his family, about what was happening with basketball, this, that, whatever. But at the end, when I left, he said, hey, thank you for coming over. That actually meant a lot to me. And I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize, that you could have that kind of impact from both people. I felt great too. But it was a reminder to me that what my parents were encouraging me to do was to take social risk. And we all need to be able to take a little bit of risk socially in order to forge meaningful connections, right? If we can't tell somebody that, hey, I like you, I'm interested in you, I would love to take you out for lunch or just spend time together or take a walk, we may never find a relationship that's fulfilling to us, right? If we don't feel comfortable, having a conversation with somebody who's sitting in the cafeteria or is in our class, we may never develop the friendships that ultimately change our life. And same at work. If we're not able to talk to work colleagues, we may not develop good relationships at work. And I just think that this is a muscle that we have to build. And as parents, we got to help our kids build. It doesn't mean that we can't do it compassionately and with support. But I do think it means that we have to be able to tolerate some discomfort, or at least set the expectation for our kids that, this may not be easy, in the beginning, the first time you go up and talk to somebody or ask them a question. I'll ask maybe just share just on a personal for my own kids. Okay, when my kids went through the first year of the pandemic, they were really young. And it was a time, my son was 4, my daughter was 2 at the time. And that was a really important time, social development for them. And before the pandemic, they were both kind of pretty social kids, interacting with strangers, no problem, whatever. After the pandemic, after that, year or so of just largely not being, around that many people outside immediate family, they became incredibly shy. And we have spent the last few years trying to figure out, my wife and I, how do we get them to be comfortable with social interaction again? And we got a lot of advice from friends, from teachers, from anybody who would give us advice, trying to figure out how to, because we knew that in home they were perfectly social and everything. But with teachers, with other adults, even sometimes with other kids, it was much harder for them. So we would do these things with them where we would go to a part of town where, it was a safe part of town, pretty friendly. And there were a lot of tables there where people would just sit and eat at tables from restaurants close by. And we would actually challenge them. We gave them a piece of paper where they had 3 simple questions that they would take that paper up to a table and they would ask the adults the questions that were on those papers. Oh. And they were very, very simple. Might be I don't know, what's your favorite color, or what's your favorite flower, simple things like this. But it was a challenge for them. We were challenging them to then interact on a simple matter, with someone they didn't know. And we were there about 10 feet behind them. So they knew that worst comes to worst, I can always run back to mom or dad. But it actually sort of pushed them to get a little bit more comfortable with interaction. So I do think that this is a vital muscle that we have to build more intentionally than perhaps we've ever had to, in recent history. And it's because fundamentally our social environment has changed, and we've got to help young people through that.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting way to look at it. In the past, the culture, the world around us probably meant that our innate ability to connect with other humans, that's what makes us who we are, would naturally be fostered and nurtured just because of the way we used to live. You had to do it. Right. You couldn't sit at home on your smartphone and order your grocery shopping and whatever film you want to watch. You can do everything by yourself now. I was explaining to my son last week, I said, in the 90s, if we wanted to watch something and it had just come out, well, it would be in the cinema first. A few months later, it would be out on a videotape. And, I said people on a Friday and Saturday night used to go to like Blockbuster video store and actually wait and queue. And there was only like 5 videos and you'd have to bring it back and rewind it. And it was just, it's incredible to think how quickly things have moved on from that. Yeah. And that may seem like just such a small thing. Of course, it's nice to be able to stream any movie you want at any time, but it comes at a cost.
Yes.
It comes at a cost where you no longer have to interact. You don't even have to talk to the guy behind the till at Blockbuster and, speak to them and wait for them to go and find the video. Say all those little things. I think we've just taken it for granted. You see it everywhere now. And I think, yes, we can look at the lockdowns in 2020 and beyond in different countries and the impact that has had. But this was going on before then.
Absolutely was.
It may have been accelerated. It was going on before then. So I guess the natural progression for me, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is in the past, the norm was we were able to connect.
Yeah.
Now it's not. So now we need to teach people proactively, probably in schools, we need to teach kids these skills. Parents maybe need to be taught by leaders in society that, hey, it's a really good idea to help your kids lean into their social discomfort because that's how they're going to grow.
I think that's exactly what we have to do, both as parents and actually in our schools, is just recognize we have to proactively build the social muscle for our kids. Because I do think that the default mode has shifted from social to solitary, right? That's the default mode now. It is, I can be in my home and get all my packages delivered, see whatever content I want on my computer screen, check on what's happening in my friends' lives on social media. I can do all of that alone, like in my house. I don't even have to go out and get groceries or food. So if that default mode is shifted, that means we got to be proactive. There's a parallel here to physical activity too, right? Yeah. Like 500, maybe more than that, 500,000 years ago, people didn't have to think that much about whether they were getting enough steps, like in their day, or how physically active they were. Like as a part of your day-to-day life, you were moving around a lot. You had to. But now, because we have developed more sedentary lifestyles, because sedentary is now the default, we have to be proactive about building physical activity into our day. And I think we're seeing a similar phenomenon when it comes to social health, that because we've defaulted to solitary, we've got to proactively build in social skill. And I think it's not just skill, but social activity for adults as well. Yeah. Like for many of us, it's not always easy to just get up the wherewithal to like go out and hang out with your friends, or to make plans, to have lunch, with an old colleague, or to go see family. But that's something we've got to proactively do, because it just doesn't happen by default. And I find even in my own life, I've got to be more proactive than I was before. Otherwise, as an introvert, I can find myself sometimes easily sliding into a phase where I could go days, without really seeing anyone outside of my wife and my kids. And my wife will sometimes remind me, she'll be like, hey, we got to get out and like see people. And so I'm trying to be much more proactive about that.
If you found that content useful, I think you're really going to enjoy this video where I outline a simple framework for a morning routine that can immediately improve your health and your happiness. You've actually made yourself more resilient. You've actually lengthened the distance between where you currently are and your stress threshold and where you're going to be after that morning routine.